Good evening.
Bonsoir. Good
Bonsoir. Bonsoir Nigel. And bonsoir à tous.
Joris, et bonsoir à tous. Welcome to the Little French Church of Saint-Esprit and our weekly Bible study together. Here, I'm Nigel, I'm the rector of the church.
And I'm Joris, I'm the curate at Saint-Esprit. Tonight we're going to have a look at the readings for the last, the Gospel reading for the last Sunday in the season of Epiphany. And it so happens to be the reading that's traditionally associated to Transfiguration. That's the reading of Jesus' Transfiguration. We're reading it in the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 17, verse 1 to 9. If you are joining us, don't hesitate to leave a little message in the chat, say hi, and we'll be happy also to interact with you in the chat and engage with your questions or remarks. But let us start with a prayer. Commençons par prier. O blessed God, who caused all Holy Scripture to be written for our learning, grant us so to hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that we may embrace and hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life, which you have given us in our Saviour Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Right, what we're going to do is read it as usual in three different versions. An English version from the Revised Standard, a French version from the
Nouvelle Français Courant,
Français Courant, and then a paraphrase version in the Message. And perhaps as we read through, there could be a little word even, just a tiny little phrase, a fragment of the thing that stands out, or a general idea. If so, just pop it in the chat if you'd like to, or pop it down on a piece of paper or on your phone or wherever, just so that you can have a little think about it as we work through the lesson. So here we are, Matthew 17, 1 to 9 in the New Revised Standard. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself, alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered to them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead."
Six jours après, Jésus prend avec lui Pierre, Jacques et Jean, frères de Jacques, et les conduit à l'écart sur une haute montagne. Il fut transformé devant eux. Son visage se mit à briller comme le soleil, et ses vêtements devinrent blancs comme la lumière. Soudain, Moïse et Élie leur apparurent, et tous deux parlaient avec Jésus. Pierre dit à Jésus, « Seigneur, il est bon que nous soyons ici. Si tu le veux, je dresserai ici 3 tentes, une pour toi, une pour Moïse et une pour Élie. » Il parlait encore lorsqu'une nuée lumineuse vint les couvrir, et de la nuée, une voix se fit entendre. « Celui-ci est mon Fils bien-aimé, en qui je mets toute ma joie. Écoutez-le. » Quand les disciples entendirent cette voix, ils eurent tellement peur qu'ils se jetèrent face contre terre. Jésus s'approcha, les toucha et dit « Relevez-vous, n'ayez pas peur. » Ils levèrent alors les yeux et ne virent plus que Jésus, seul. Tandis qu'ils descendaient de la montagne, Jésus leur fit cette recommandation. Ne parlez à personne de cette vision, jusqu'à ce que le Fils de l'homme ressuscite d'entre les morts.
6 days later, 3 of them saw that glory. Jesus took Peter and the brothers, James and John, and led them up a high mountain. His appearance changed from the inside out, right before their eyes. Sunlight poured from his face. His clothes were filled with light. Then they realized that Moses and Elijah were also there, in deep conversation with him. Peter broke in. Master, this is a great moment. What would you think if I built 3 memorials here on the mountain, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah? While he was going on like this, babbling, a light radiant cloud enveloped them, and sounding from deep in the cloud a voice, "This is my son, marked by my love, focus of my delight. Listen to him." When the disciples heard it, they fell flat on their faces, scared to death. But Jesus came over and touched them. "Don't be afraid." When they opened their eyes and looked around, all they saw was Jesus, only Jesus. Coming down the mountain, Jesus swore them to secrecy. "Don't breathe a word of what you've seen. After the Son of Man is raised from the dead, you are free to talk." Et voilà. Bon.
Interesting. Well, some things that came through for me is like they fall flat on their faces to the ground, and then Jesus raises them by touching them. This whole like decreation, going back to the ground, and then Jesus like bringing them back to life, reminded me of the creation of man. And this also, they opened their eyes and looked around. All they saw was Jesus. When after they eaten the fruit, they opened their eyes and they see. But here they see Jesus alone.
Yes. Yeah.
So they don't see their shame, or they don't see their... Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yes.
And the whole scene is set on a mountain, just like the Garden of Eden is on a mountain too.
Yeah, there are strong... I'd not thought of that. Strong parallels there.
Yeah, and the fact that there's a parallel here too, that they're fallen on the ground and Jesus revives them, and at the end he says, only after the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And in Hebrew imagination, anxiety and death is more of a spectrum than our biological understanding of it too. So it's kind of interesting.
Yes, scared to death.
Yeah.
I think I was struck by this, I don't know why, but I've always, even after reading it in the Gospels, thought that they were overcome by the radiant light. But it's not the light that overcomes them, it's the voice.
Yeah.
And it's, God doesn't say, look at him.
Yeah.
He says, listen to him.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I find that quite an interesting turn. I don't know what to make of it just now.
No, there are a lot of
struck
that. I mean, it's striking whenever you start pulling on one thread, you see like there's a lot behind it. Because Jesus and the other people are closed basically in this cloud, right? So when you think of like the envelope and you think of all the thing about God of Eden being naked, and then, you know, the whole importance of wrapping yourself, especially as they hear the voice of God, because that's the voice of God in the garden that scares them, basically, and they go in hiding. And here you have the voice of God that says, listen to him, and then when they actually listen to him, they are restored. And they see him.
Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's full of echoes to other texts.
Interesting. Yeah.
And of course, the radiancy of his garment, it's also like a deep echo to the Genesis story, because the word for light and flesh are homophones almost. It's hor. It depends, like slightly different guttural, but it's basically they're closed in light or they're closed in skin. And here you have him being closed in light and skin. Well,
I have a little poem at the very end on that theme.
So if you have any other first thoughts, don't hesitate to put them in the chat.
Here are a few Episcopal Church recommended Bible study questions for the week. When do you feel the farthest from or the most differentiated from God? At those points when you perceive the great distance between yourself and God, what erases that distance such that you may participate in communion with God? Not quite sure how that related to the text, but that was one of the only questions that was there.
Maybe their fear, I think.
Yes, perhaps that was it. Yeah,
the greatest distance, they realized.
Yeah. Yes.
What erases that distance? I think that's Jesus reaching out to them in that story. Right?
That's interesting, isn't it? Rather than our repentance reaching out to God, it's God reaching out to us.
Yeah.
As we were talking about, as you were preparing a new confession for us for the service.
Yeah.
When have I heard Jesus say, "Get up and do not be afraid"? Several times, I suppose.
In the morning.
In the morning, yes. Or when you're getting ready to do something that you don't particularly want to do. Or
are you thinking of the parochial report, Nigel?
The parochial report, yes. Get up and do not be afraid. Well, sit down and do it.
Yes. Yeah.
But it is a good point, actually. That's the first thing that Jesus says. Do not be afraid. Like in the angelic visions, and he's radiating like an angel. Yeah. And he says the same thing as Gabriel says to Mary.
Yes, exactly.
Don't be afraid.
And also at the resurrection.
Yes. Yeah.
Because the women are afraid.
Yeah. Where do you see evidence of the inbreaking of Christ's glory in the world?
It's interesting because it's not the inbreaking of Christ's glory, the transfiguration. On the contrary, it's a private revelation.
Yes,
right?
it is. Yeah.
And the inbreaking of Christ's glory is going to be on the cross. That's the public scene. Whereas, and the resurrection, but the resurrection itself is accessible through discipleship. It's like revealed to the disciples. So there's not like public breakthrough of Christ's glory like this. I mean, that's the coming in glory at the end times is that, but that's not what transfiguration is about.
No, it's the seeing something that is always there and has always been there and will be there even on the cross.
Yeah.
Maybe especially on the cross.
Yeah. It's a partly, as we'll see, it's a very interesting text because it's a text that's supposed to be a key to understand a moment, a mystery in Jesus' life that's supposed to help us understand and help the disciples and Peter, who was just renouncing and saying no, don't die, helping them to see through this darkness. But it's not just light spreading everything.
No, I don't think so.
It's way more relational to darkness in a very more incarnate way.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question to see how it's put. Yes. Well, we're going to have a look as usual into the context around our text before, and then we'll dive into the text itself by looking at some key elements in it. But so to begin with, let's talk a little bit about the geographic setting of our passage. It takes place 1 week after Peter's confession. You remember when he said that you're going to. there's the denial, a form of pre-denial. First, you're not going to go, and then he says, you are the Son of God. And it follows Jesus' first announcement of his death and resurrection. That's unsettling the disciples. And it's supposed to be set on a high mountain. So there are different possibilities of what this mountain could be. Some people say it's Mount Tabor in Galilee. This is Mount Tabor today. It's a high mountain, but I think it's climbable.
Yes, doesn't look impossible.
Yes,
It's
4th
an
century.
afternoon stroll, really.
Yes. And that's the traditional site since the 4th century of the Transfiguration. So I believe there's a church. Do we have a picture of that?
No, we don't, but we do have a picture of the other site,
possible.
and it's
Great.
probably-
Yes, that sounds a bit, interestingly enough, that's white and dazzling light.
Yes,
But that's probably a bit of a hike.
Yeah, and it's winter. I don't know when he went up the mountain. But
So in the summer it's not white, Manhattan?
no,
There's no snow on the top?
it melts.
Oh, it all melts. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, they could be there. That's a big hike.
Yeah, that is more of a hike. There's ski resorts up it and
I
things.
see.
And what have you.
So you can actually ski down from where Jesus had his
We don't imagine
transfiguration.
the Holy Land to have snowy mountains, but
Yeah.
it does, yes, or used to, I don't know.
Yeah.
And this is the other place where it may very well be, because it's very near Caesarea Philippi. It's not that far away from where 6 days earlier Peter has made this declaration. He's, who do you say that I am?
Yeah. That would explain the tents too, if they have to go so high.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. What they'd make them out of if there were no ski poles or slaloms.
Yeah, I don't know.
So only Peter, James and John are present to witness, but interestingly enough, those three, Peter, James and John, are the only ones present at Jairus' daughter's raising, which is in Mark 5, and then later on in the Garden of Gethsemane with Jesus. In Matthew chapter 26, we see again this trio of Peter, James and John, who are also up the mountain. I don't think we do know the season in which it happened. Sometimes you can tell the season, because Mark would say there's a lot of grass and it was near Passover, or there's some sort of time festival reference. I don't know, maybe the Feast of Booths, because they're talking about making
that's one.
booths,
Yes,
but
that's
who
one
knows?
of the people think it might be related to that too. But
Sukkot, which is what, in the fall.
yeah,
I don't know when the snow comes on.
I have no idea.
Probably more like in December.
yeah, I imagine.
January. Yeah, if it's anything like the Troodos Mountains in Cyprus.
Yeah, well, that's a beautiful view though.
It is,
It's
isn't
quite
it?
far away.
Yeah.
So let's have a look at the theological context then. We've looked at the geographical context. So this passage marks really an important turning point in the Gospel of Mark, because that's the moment when he's going to transition from his ministry in Galilee, his preaching, his teaching, his healing, to walking towards Jerusalem and facing. First, he just announced the fact that the Son of Man will have to suffer, and he is going to go to the center of political and religious power in Jerusalem. So that's a moment when there is kind of on this mountain, kind of an axis, a hinge that's happening, and it's an epiphany for everybody. I mean, it's a turning point also for the disciples, for Jesus, but for the disciples, for geographic settings are changing. And Jesus is representing, we're going to go a bit more in details about that, but as a new Moses here, ascending the mountain with his disciples. And the traditional interpretation is that Moses and Elijah represent the law and the prophets that are fulfilled by Jesus. That's why they are in conversation with Jesus. Some of the church fathers said that it's also what Moses saw. Moses saw Jesus on the mountain. So it's kind of like a space out of out of time, this encounter, right, that they have. And so it prepares the disciples to accept that suffering and glory will coexist in the Messiah, and that it's not antinomic, that's going to come together. Yeah. You see one of the very famous icons of the Transfiguration. It's a pattern that has been copied many times. We do have a copy of it in the church, right? Is it the
yes,
same?
we do. It's not exactly the same one. There are several versions, but it's interpreted along the same lines. You can always tell Peter because he's gesturing
He's saying about
down
the
at the
booth.
bottom there and talking to Jesus. And also in this particular icon, you can see them shielding their faces from the light, but also in the rocks on either side, you can see them going up the mountain on the left and coming back down the mountain.
Oh, yes, that's
on the
interesting.
right. The three little figures that look like they're in a cave.
Oh, yeah.
So it's got the three moments: the going up, the manifestation, and the going back down again.
That's interesting.
Transfiguration.
Yeah, it's dynamic. So it's interesting that it's a dynamic icon about the Transfiguration. It's not just like an ecstatic moment.
No.
It's really, I mean, as we say, it's also a moment that's really a hinge. So if we understand it as kind of like ecstatic, like just static, it's not.
No.
Which it is, yeah.
So what's the immediate context of this? What's going on? How is Matthew shaping the narrative at this point, or how is Jesus working this through? First of all, as Joris has already mentioned, they already know from Jesus' lips that he is going to suffer and be rejected like the prophets before him, and that he's going to die. So they need some encouragement, and this is a spectacular, encouraging moment for Peter, James, and John. Peter has just been rebuked for rejecting the idea of a suffering Messiah, especially out of context, and this seems to be putting this in context. See this? This is what's really happening, even when it doesn't seem to be the case. This light will still be there. It's sort of reassurance.
It's interesting because Elijah and Moses are also figures of suffering servants, right?
Yeah.
So, and he's portrayed amongst them.
Yes, yeah. So as we can see, for that reason, and with the benefit of hindsight for us anyway, it provides this foretaste of resurrection and the final glory. Yes. And as we can see in this, when Jesus says at the end of this, don't talk about this until I've been risen from the dead, we can see that it's already being linked to Easter in some way. We're going to discover how in more detail in a minute. So this messianic secret that we often hear talked about, especially in Mark's Gospel, means that the Transfiguration, you can only really understand the Transfiguration if you place it in the light of the resurrection. The two lights sort of play off each other.
Yeah.
The resurrection explains the Transfiguration, and the Transfiguration is the light of the resurrection also. The two events are very, very much related, narratively, thematically, in all sorts of fascinating, very beautiful ways.
Yeah. And there's, of course, a very important echo to Moses' ascent of Mount Sinai. And I think the best way to just have a look at it is to read a passage from Exodus 34. That's really the intertext of our passage. And then we'll look a bit more in details of what it can mean.
As Moses came down from Mount Sinai, as he came down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hand, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone, because he'd been talking with God. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, the skin of his face was shining, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses spoke with them. Afterward all the Israelites came near, and he gave them in commandment all that the Lord had spoken with him on Mount Sinai. When Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would take the veil off until he came out. And when he came out and told the Israelites what had been commanded, the Israelites would see the face of Moses, that the skin of his face was shining, and Moses would put the veil on his face again until he went in to speak with him.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating detail on the left there, that Moses was depicted with horns very often, and nobody... Well, of course they knew why, because the Hebrews seemed to say that there were horns on his head. They discovered in Assyrian manuscripts that this was a description of the rays of the sun, because they look, if you look
like
at the
horns,
sun coming through the clouds, they look like horns.
Mm-hmm.
And so the rays of the sun were the horns of the sun in Assyrian.
That's interesting connections.
Yeah.
It's a book of Hour here from Belgium. I think it's at the Morgan Library, actually.
It's very beautiful. Yeah.
It's interesting. You see God in the background with the two tablets, and then Moses with the two tablets.
Yes. Yeah.
So what's analogous to this passage of Exodus we've read? Well, there's another passage also in Exodus 24 when God calls Moses out of the cloud on the seventh day. So you see there's this same timing too, mention of the clouds that also comes from Exodus. But in our passage in Exodus 34, we see that in our passage they have like bright cloud too, like a voice speaks from it. Here God speaks to Moses. And in both stories, you have onlookers and special group of 3. And these onlookers are also afraid. You have in our passage Aaron and the Israelites, and in the passage that we read from the Transfiguration, you have Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, who are not like separate.
Yes.
They're kind of a crowd. So it's one person and a crowd. It also takes place on the mountain, of course. And what's also interesting is that Moses and Elijah are the 2 figures of the Old Testament who speak directly with God on Mount Sinai in Horeb in Kings. But they're both people who have had direct encounters and chats with God on the mountain. So the presence there makes sense in a certain way. They've been in the same setting. And it also, this passage really makes us think of Epiphany mountains in the Old Testament, other places where there has been, as we've seen many times before, the mountains are traditionally in, I think, Middle Eastern imagination, the place of where heaven and earth are joined, and that's the place on which you would build a temple. That's the place. I mean, it's not only in the Middle East. In Greece there was the same. In Rome there was the same. I think it's probably a very archaic human way of thinking that you would have like sacred places and place of encounters with the divine on top of a mountain. It's also because when you're on top of it, you see the world differently.
And also it's to do with creation or recreation, new creation also, because it's the mound is the first thing that emerges from the primordial waters in Egypt and in Semitic mythologies as well. That the mound is the place where everything first begins.
Yeah. It's interesting because there's a lot to a mountain, of course. I mean, it's also when cities are built on mountains, they're also safer. You can defend them more easily. You can see far away, so you can be protected. So there are a lot of things that can be easily associated with the divine in sense of like protection, in sense of like seeing afar. So it's a very interesting geographical, spiritual place, mountains.
So we can see here that we know that Matthew is particularly interested in drawing parallels like this, so you can expect him to make the most of this transfiguration story. We already know that Matthew is saying this took place in order to fulfill what the prophets said, so we're going to see Jesus being patterned on Moses as a sort of prefiguration or type.
Yeah, the type.
So we can see in the infancy narrative, as I've already mentioned, Herod's massacre of the infants echoes Pharaoh's killing of the Hebrew children. And then Jesus escapes to Egypt just as Moses fled Egypt. So Moses is going in the opposite direction, Jesus is going back, so that the words of the prophet can be fulfilled. Out of Egypt have I called my son.
Yeah.
So a new start from the old typography. Sermon on the Mount. Jesus ascends a mountain to deliver this new law, and that reflects or mirrors Moses receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai. Once again, a sort of typography.
Yeah.
There are 5 major discourses in Matthew. That's the way he structures his gospel, in these sort of teaching blocks that really evoke the 5 books of Moses: Matthew, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the Torah. So it's once again reflected. Also, we see these 40 days and 40 nights of temptation in the wilderness, and that echoes Moses' 40 days on Mount Sinai and Israel's 40 years wandering in the wilderness. This typographical reading it flows from the Bible itself. It's not something that was invented by the early church fathers and then expounded in the medieval period and sort of fell out of favour in the Middle Ages, but not really.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting to see these patterns. Yeah, because the Reformation wanted to read them as like historical accounts, or read them linearly, whereas here we see that it's not strictly linear. It's using patterns of movements and symbols and things to repattern and show how the story is really imbued with the Spirit of God. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, this is the second part of that.
No, so Jesus, to continue, Jesus is patterned on Moses, as we said, and or you can see it as Moses is a prefiguration of Jesus. That would be how the patristic, the fathers of the church would read it, really. Seeing Jesus pattern on Moses is maybe more of a contemporary literary look at it. And so you see the authoritative teaching. Jesus repeatedly says, "You have heard it, but I say to you." And he positions himself also as the ultimate interpreter and fulfiller of the law of Moses. So there's this intimate relationship here. You see it very well on this infographique. I don't know how you call this.
Yes.
But they parallel a lot of images and things related between Jesus and Moses, and it's quite helpful, I find. Shepherds of Sinai, shepherds of souls, lead all to heaven, leads to promised land, baptism, Eucharist, Ezekiel 40. The 40 is really one of the important figures, symbolizes.
It's very interesting, really, because this whole idea of interpreting Jesus as the fulfillment of all of these things, which we can see in Matthew's Gospel very strongly, even though Matthew's Gospel is very a sort of Jewish, if you want to call it that, it could lead itself, especially in the medieval period, to saying, well, the Jews are no longer useful. Everything has been fulfilled. But some interesting new research has been taken place to see what sort of discourse was happening between the rabbis in the Middle Ages and the medieval theologians. there's a lot from the medieval theologians, but not much research has been done on how much the rabbis were talking to the Christians. And now it's been sort of discovered that there was a lot more conversations were actually going on, and there was a lot more cross-fertilization
between the
these
yes.
two groups.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
That's some sort of recent thing.
Yes, no, it's very interesting. Yeah, because there's always there has been the tendency in the church to talk about it as supersessionists. Yeah. Yeah, so there are lots here. There's covenant mediator. That's also the role of course, of Moses, and the role of Jesus. Jesus who establishes the new covenant at the Last Supper, and Moses, of course, mediates the covenant of God with his people on Mount Sinai. Yeah.
Yes, sort of Jesus Mark 2, or Moses, the sequel.
Yes. What's also very interesting in our passage is that there are echoes of Jesus' baptism. Of course, in what the Voices says, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." This is almost texto what we heard in Matthew 3:17. Except this little bit, listen to him. Which is interesting because the disciples are definitely listening at that moment and seeing the reality of what it implies for him to be the suffering servant.
Yeah. Touching that the first thing that Jesus says to the disciples after God's told them to listen is, "Do not be afraid."
Yeah.
I find that quite touching.
It is, yeah. So all of this really connects the story of transfiguration with the story of the baptism of Jesus, and it's interesting in the church calendar because the story of the baptism of Jesus is read at the very beginning of the season of Epiphany. So Epiphany starts with the wise men visiting Jesus in the crib, but the following few days after, you have the feast of the baptism of our Lord. And here you have the conclusion of the season of Epiphany with the reading of Jesus' transfiguration that harkens back to the story of Jesus' baptism. Yeah.
I was just thinking also of the way in which the Greek Orthodox celebrates the Epiphany, with also one of the great important stories in Epiphany in the Greek Orthodox Church is the turning of water into wine.
Yes.
And in that story, Mary, the mother of Jesus, says, "Listen to him."
Yes, that's true.
Do what he tells you.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Do whatever he tells you.
It's a sort of transfiguration in itself.
Yes, it is. Yeah, there's a transfiguration of the water into wine for sure. Yeah. But I think so we've looked at different texts that are in relation to our text, but the major kind of axis, because we said there is the transfiguration, there's the resurrection on one side, and they kind of like supposed to be read together, but they revolve around the story of Jesus' passion. And everything in the passion is almost present. It's kind of the shadow of the transfiguration, because you see that it follows very much the same patterns. So in Matthew 27, for instance, you have the centurion and those attending who see all these miraculous signs that are said to be fearing exceedingly. And it's exactly the same phrase as in this passage of Matthew we just read of the Transfiguration. There's nowhere in Matthew do you find this exact same phrase. So it's definitely inviting you to relate these two texts. So you also have a group of men who are afraid by a vision related to Jesus' elevation. And in both narratives, of course, you have confession of Jesus as Son, the presence of three named onlookers. You have the three male disciples, Peter, James, and John, in the Transfiguration. And you have three female disciples at the Passion, Mary of Magdala, Mary of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee.
Yes, quite.
So the mom is there
Yes.
when you have
Yeah.
the sons at the Transfiguration. So
Yeah.
he's definitely inviting you to relate these two. And the number 6 is also present in both stories. It's after 6 days and on the 6th hour. You have this scene. Yeah. It's a painting here from Cranach the Elder.
Yes, it's the converted centurion. Surely this man was the Son of God.
It's interesting. There's a rainbow.
Yes, there is, isn't there?
Yeah.
Notice that.
Huh.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a little word caption coming out of the
Yes, exactly.
centurion's mouth.
Yeah. It's interesting because it says, surely this man was the Son of God here, and here you have Jesus Christ. So you have all the captions. Yeah.
Do you want me to do the Transfiguration?
Okay, I'll do the crucifixion. Okay.
So here's 11 points in common. I mean, this is no coincidence. This is really a powerful thing to think about. So in the Transfiguration, we have seen that Jesus takes other people up the mountain. He's in charge of the expedition.
Yeah. Whereas in the crucifixion, unfortunately, he's taken by others. He's led as a lamb to the slaughter on top of that mountain outside of Jerusalem to be crucified.
In the Transfiguration, we can see that Jesus is elevated up on high. We will see that up on the top of the mountain in the icons. It's very powerful elevation of Jesus in this moment of transfigurative glory.
And of course, on the crucifixion, he's elevated, risen up on the cross. Yeah.
In the Transfiguration, this is private. There are just those 3 people present with Moses and Elijah and Jesus himself. So it's a private epiphany, a private showing.
Yeah. Whereas the crucifixion is a public spectacle, but also visible only for people who see it, you see? So there's a dimension of there are people who see and people who don't see. So there's this ambiguity too that harkens back to the Transfiguration, I think.
In the Transfiguration, obviously, it's all about light, glowing, shining, dazzling light.
Yeah. Whereas the crucifixion, of course, is about darkness. It's the whole of creation that turns dark. All the natural elements also. Yeah.
In the Transfiguration, Jesus' garments are illuminated. It says in Luke, I think it says, no launderer could make them whiter.
Whiter
it's
than
an
that.
interesting little detail from Luke that we don't get.
Yeah, it's a hint to the prophets, right?
Yes.
As well, yeah. Whereas in the crucifixion, Jesus is stripped of his garment by the soldiers and people who cast lots to have his clothes.
And for number 6, we see that Jesus is glorified on the top of the mountain, glorified not just because of the transfigured way he looks, but glorified by God's voice intervening in this.
Yeah, it's interesting. You have God who calls him his son. There's this. He's glorified also through relationship, right? Whereas in the crucifixion, Jesus is shamed. The relationship are and desecrated. So he's not recognized as the Son of God, only ironically. It's really in sharp contrast to the Transfiguration. Yeah.
Number 7, Elijah appears without being called. There's no evocation of his name. It's just, and they saw Elijah and Moses with him.
Yeah, and this I found very astonishing because I didn't think about that before looking at it. But Elijah is also called in the crucifixion story, but doesn't appear.
We can see that in the Transfiguration, we've got these 2 people beside Jesus, Moses and Elijah.
Yeah, just to correct slightly what I said, Elijah is not called by Jesus. People think that he's calling.
Listen, he's calling Elijah. Let's see if Elijah comes.
Yes,
to help
exactly.
him.
Yeah, I wanted to correct that. But that's an interesting point, because there's a whole misconception here that probably people say it might also have to do with his accent as he was Galilean, because he said Eli, Eli, Eli.
Eli.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Two disciples. So you said two disciples besides Jesus, and in the crucifixion, especially in Matthew, there are two criminals besides Jesus. There's no good and bad. There are two criminals in Matthew.
Mm-hmm. And here in number 9, we can see that God celebrates or confesses Jesus with words directly from Psalm 2, "This is my son."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whereas in the crucifixion, Jesus also quotes Psalms. He quotes Psalm 22nd when he cries out in despair, "My Lord, why have you forsaken me?" Mm-hmm. Right? It's an interesting psalm because it's a psalm that goes then towards a film of vindication and hope. But that's definitely interesting to see that there's exactly a parallel there.
Mm. Number 10, there's in the Transfiguration we see this reverent prostration. They were overcome. They fell to the ground in awe of this voice.
Yeah. Whereas the crucifixion, of course, is the mocking in prostration to the King of the Jews.
Mm.
Yeah.
And there's probably other parallels, but number 11 here, we can see that Jesus then comes and touches the disciples, as Joris mentions, bringing them back up from the earth.
Yeah. And in the crucifixion, in the aftermath, the disciples asked to take Jesus' body down from the cross. Mm. So, it's very powerful.
They're very powerful parallels, aren't they?
Yeah.
And that's the Transfiguration window from Chartres, I think.
Yeah. So what can we make of these parallelisms? Well, we can first be amazed, I think, by them. It's a way of seeing God's Spirit at work, if we believe also, as we believe that there are actual fulfillment of Scripture and a form of a reality, Scripture taking shape in the life of Jesus Christ. That's not just a mere literary exercise. But there are also, it's interesting to see that Transfiguration and the crucifixion, as we are invited to read these two and experience these two mysteries together, show us that there are two extremities of human experience, and two extremities that Jesus has lived. The extreme dehumanization, desecration of human nature in the crucifixion, the trial, the crucifixion, the abuse, and the divinization of human nature, because he's the Son of God, he's a human being who is transfigured, and about whom God says, listen to him. So it's both la grandeur et la misère, as Pascal would say, of human being. That's shown in these parallels, and they're invited to be read together. And that's kind of hopeful, I find, because when you think only of the misery of man, of humankind, the Bible forces you to look at the other stories.
The other story as well.
Yes, you're not invited to dwell on one story, which is extremely healthy in terms of hope. That it's written in. It's kind of like there are two texts in one. When we read the Passion narrative in a few weeks' time, we have to read also the Transfiguration.
Yes, that's there too.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful thought.
Yeah. So it really shows us that Jesus embodies the gamut of human possibilities, and that things come together towards something better through him, and that's what the resurrection would be, really.
Yeah.
It's quite of a beautiful painting there. It's a painting from Italian end of the Middle Ages, beginning of the Renaissance painter, Lamentation of Christ with the three Marys. I chose especially with the three Marys because we talked about the fact that the three Marys are kind of the parallel in the story of the crucifixion of the three disciples at the Transfiguration.
Yep.
And here they receive the body of Jesus. Yeah.
The hands are very beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, I like the kiss.
And the kiss, yeah. Well, what's all this business about these booths then that Peter mentions? The very popular sermon saying, "Oh, we want to stay up on the top of the mountain. We're building a permanent residence for it. This to happen. We don't want to go back down into the mean old world."
Yes.
But I think there's a bit more to it than that, really. People have said that it's this misguided attempt to prolong that particular experience, but that's only the tip of the iceberg, actually.
Yeah.
Peter wants to capture that particular moment rather than understand that actually it's something to do with what Jesus said about his crucifixion and resurrection. It points beyond.
Yeah.
It's not there for its own sake.
You're not supposed to dwell on it.
No, you cannot
dwell in it.
there forever. And even one of these booths is a transitory construction.
Yeah.
So
yes, it's interesting because he says, let's build a tent, but a tent is not a house,
no,
right?
it's not a house, no.
So it's interesting.
This is a little 18th century depiction
that's
of it
great.
by somebody on the left-hand side of the Feast of Sukkot. It's also, if you read it that way, three little equal tents for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. Let's build one separate one for each. And by proposing these three tents, Peter is actually putting Jesus on the same level as the law and the prophets.
Which sounds kind of what you would have thought, because it's kind of the direction. It's kind of the direction it always goes.
So Peter hasn't really yet realized by building three equivalent little tents that Jesus has actually fulfilled and superseded both Elijah and Moses. So anyway, yes, there is an echo here of the Feast of the Tabernacles, these booths, things, these sukkot, these temporary shelters that were built during the Jewish festival. And we mentioned earlier on that maybe that's something to do with the time of year that this is taking place. Perhaps not. But perhaps these sukkot built, essentially the idea was you lived outside for a particular period of time to symbolize the fact that the Hebrews had wandered in the wilderness for a particular period of time. So you eat, sleep, drink in these temporary booths, remembering the wanderings in the wilderness and the coming of into the promised land. Here, maybe Peter is thinking this. We'll do this wilderness minute up here on the mountain because the Messianic age is about to arrive when Jesus goes back down again.
Yeah.
Because we're about to enter the promised land, but this time it's going to be the real thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So, and another way you can look also at Peter's proposal, basically, is that it's a fear-driven response. And Matthew really notes too that Peter did not know what he said. So it's kind of like, like when you do something a bit dumb because you're stressed. And the disciples were overcome with fear. So he's babbling in confusion rather than trying to think twice about what's happening. And what's kind of comical, I would say, in the scene is that there's an interruption. So he's still, how you can... It's very difficult to do when you read it yourself. You would have to have two voices reading the gospel, for instance.
Yes.
But basically, you have God's corrective interruption. The Father immediately intervenes with the voice from the cloud directing, at that moment, interestingly enough, the attention towards Jesus. This is my beloved Son, listen to him. So it kind of contradicts the proposition, the offer of Peter to kind of put the three on the same level. Yeah. And it's also consistent with Peter's resistance to, as Nigel said, the journey to Jerusalem. It's very much echoing his earlier rebuke of Jesus' need to go on his passion journey. And it's interesting because kind of, I would say Peter in this story is kind of a foil of the bad reader of the story.
Yes, that's true,
so
isn't it?
Is the example of a reader who would also someone who would witness this mystery and say, this is just it. There's no relation to any other text. It's all about glory. It's all about, Jesus being. Unfortunately, a lot of Christian art tend to do that, true. And it's very difficult to find good depictions of the Transfiguration that try to understand this very layered or interwoven narrative with both the passion and the resurrection. So as a conclusion, we see that it's like both. There's a Transfiguration is a foreshadowing of both the crucifixion, the resurrection, also the second advent of Jesus, and it shows. When it seems to be all about glory, it shows that sonship with God is a form of suffering service for Jesus and also for us as we follow on the path of Jesus. That's why I put this famous painting of the resurrection because it's a beautiful one. I like that there is the light of Jesus that comes through here from the tomb, raising from the tomb, the soldiers being dazzled too and afraid, and the lights, the fake lights, the human lights here that look very yellow compared to the shining, dazzling light coming from the risen Christ.
We just got one or two small slides. I wanted to talk very briefly about the iconography of the Transfiguration. Here are two that you see the same themes coming through on both sides. We've seen the one on the right before, but here are some key things where you can spot that it is the Transfiguration, certainly not the resurrection, though there's an overlap iconographically between the two, as we've just seen. Christ is in white. He's very often set in this mandala that we can see this oval or round shaped thing around him with rays coming out from it. You can see Moses and Elijah. Moses is going to be holding a book or tablets or something, and they are going to be there to represent the law and the prophets. And we can see Peter, James and John, always these three figures at the bottom, shielding their eyes, very often shown as falling. And very often you can spot Peter, because he's the one that speaks, and we can see him there, as I mentioned before, gesturing there in this picture, and maybe on the left-hand side as well, he's turning round and it looks as if he's about to say something, whereas the other two are falling over.
It made me realize something, that there are 6 of them, and it's on the 6th day.
And it's on the 6th day.
And you have all these connections around 6 too.
Yeah.
With Peter and Jesus surrounded by the two. Yeah, that's a very interesting construction.
There's another slide of that, I think, with a few concluding things on it. The mountain is very often very steep or tiered, that represents this ascent to the divine. We can see that in a lot of these icons, sometimes with 3 peaks very distinctively, 1 peak for each one of them. And the ascent and the descent are sometimes included, as we saw on that previous icon, with them going up the mountain and then coming down the mountain as well. That's not the case on the left-hand side. That one, I think, is... it's very old and I can't remember where it's from now. I found it somewhere anyway. So there's this contrast then between this radiant upper part of the icon very often and a darker lower portion of the icon. That classic one that we saw before, we could just go back to slide 24. You can see that very clearly on the right-hand side. It's such a classic icon of this, with the going up and down. And then the little vignettes in the top corners, the chats.
I like that the rays of light are actually kind of shining on them.
Mm.
You see the
Yes, I like that
the
as
bluish.
well. Yeah, sort of
Colour.
radiating down
Yeah.
on their clothes as well,
Yeah,
so that they can see things differently,
Yeah.
themselves differently. One tiny detail on the right-hand side that you can see very often in these icons, if you look at the figure on the far right-hand side, it looks like a sort of chapati or something that's floating above the foot. But that is actually a
sandal.
sandal
Yes.
that's flying off. And it's a reference to the story of Moses taking off
His sandals. Oh, that's very interesting.
in the presence of the burning
Yeah.
bush,
That's
which we
interesting.
didn't really cover earlier on. Or maybe it's flying off in, I don't know, shock, horror,
I mean, yes, they're running. So
amazement. Yeah. It's a very interesting, tiny detail.
it is very interesting because there's probably a lot also of overlap. We didn't look at it, but the story of the burning bush in this text, yeah.
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 And as we will see, it has another evocation that brings these two themes together. This is sometimes called the Theotokos of the Passion, the God-bearer of the Passion. The interesting thing about this picture is it's depicting Mary, the mother of Jesus, with Jesus in her arms. You can see that Jesus' left sandal has fallen from his foot
Yeah.
as he's clinging to his mother's hand. And he's looking over his shoulder to see the archangels Michael and Gabriel carrying the instruments of the Passion. That Mary is sort of looking at us, sort of pointing at Jesus, but Jesus is clinging on to Mary's hand in a sort of prefiguring of the Passion, but with some of these things that remind us too of the Transfiguration.
Yeah, so Mary is the mountain.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very beautiful.
I was quite moved by that for some reason. Anyway.
Yeah, it is.
There's one final, it's a little poem that I've always liked. It's Edwin Muir, and who was a Welsh poet from active in the 20th century. It's the Transfiguration. And the thing I like about this poem is that it's from the standpoint of the disciples. And it's not just about the glory of Jesus, it's about how they were transfigured too, and not only them, but also the whole of nature. This is not just something for the disciples, for Moses, for Matthew to make a point about how it fulfills the law and the prophets. Something else is going on here that's important. We would have thrown our clothes away for lightness, but even they, though sour and travel-stained, seemed like our flesh, made of immortal substance. And the soiled flax and the wool lay light upon us like friendly wonders, flower and flock entwined as in a morning field. Was it a vision? Or did we see that day the unseeable one glory of the everlasting world, perpetually at work, though never seen since Eden locked the gate that's everywhere and nowhere? Was the change in us alone, and the enormous earth still left forlorn, an exile or a prisoner? Yet the world we saw that day made this unreal, for all was in its place. The painted animals assembled there in gentle congregations, or sought apart their leafy oratories, or walked in peace, the wild and the tame together, as if also for them the day had come.
That's beautiful. Is it the entirety of the poem? No.
It goes on quite for longer. But I quite like the, what's the name of it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yes.
Well,
Taylor Swift.
yes.
Hasn't got you down as a Swiftie, Linnea. Yeah.
Well,
there we are.
Yes, if you have any remark or question, don't hesitate to leave them in the chat, either if you're watching live or if you're listening to us after. We are going to, if you're watching live, we're going to go to the Zoom discussion. If not, we're going to see you next week again for our Bible study. Next week it will be Ash Wednesday.
Ash Wednesday, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So we'll be looking at the temptations, I suppose, as seen through Matthew's eyes.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
good.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes.
And thanks for the chat. And we will we'll see you again soon. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye
Good
for
evening.
now. Bye.